Okay, today we're going to hear from a local person who's been around for some time. Not inferring that he's old. Anyhow, it's Dick Pust. He's an Olympia resident, and he's been in this area forever, pretty much, and has a lifetime career in broadcasting. He started KGY Radio when he was 19 years old. Except for 3 years in the Army, and most of his career there. He's Washington State Association of Broadcasters Broadcaster of the Year, has been recognized nationally by the National Association of Broadcasters as a Personality of the Year nominee. He's a graduate of Olympia High. He has a BA in Political Science from St. Martin's, where he's a distinguished alum. He's a member of the West Olympia Rotary Club and a founding member of the South Sound Reading Foundation. He received, and this is important, he received a Red Cross Hero Award for his work in providing information and promoting calm after the Nisqually earthquake. He currently does a radio program called It's Your Community on Mix 96 every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. So he's got a couple of topics he's going to give us information on. So let's invite Dick up and hear what he has to tell us.
Thank you very much, Larry. Appreciate that introduction. I'm really here because of Ken Balsley. Ken heard me speak at Tumwater Rotary and asked Larry if he would book me for this program. And I was flattered that Ken liked my talk so well at Tumwater Rotary because I consider Ken one of the best speakers I know. I know you've heard him speak many, many times on the subject of Rotary, and he is a fantastic speaker. I've never been bored when Ken speaks. He's sort of like the Donald Trump of Lacey. Aren't there a lot of comparisons? And many of you are here in this room today because Ken got you as a member. And so Ken, you're kind of my idol. And so if you like one of my talks, I'm very flattered. But Ken called Larry and said, Larry, you need to book Dick as one of the speakers. And he didn't tell Larry what I talked about. So when Larry called me, he said, what did you talk about anyway? I said, Conelrad. And Larry goes, tell me what that is. I don't have a clue. So I told him what it was, and he said, it's going to be really a snoozer of a program, Dick. Can't you come up with a better idea? So I said, how about revealing a secret about one of the government's most widely promoted programs, a secret they don't want you to know. So that's what I'm going to do today. And it's based on my experiences at KGY. I spent over half a century there, 51 years to be exact, which is a long time. But I realized a week ago today, I was down at Farmer's Market at Dingy's Puget Sound Cuisine. And the owner, Dan Ricklick, was really excited that I was there, and he was telling his teenage son that he grew up listening to me on KGY. And I could tell his son was going, huh? And so I asked his son, I said, you do know what KGY is, don't you? He says, no, never heard of it. So I feel like there might be somebody here who doesn't know what KGY is. It was a small community radio station with one of the most important impacts on this community that you can imagine. Not for the entire 92 years of its existence, but for much of it. Almost everyone listened during its peak to KGY at one time or another. In fact, I saw one survey where 70% of all radios were tuned to KGY AM 1240 for the 7 o'clock news in the morning. That's a pretty good percentage. If you can have that many people listening, you know that you've done a good job. It's also a very historic radio station, one of the very first in the nation. It was founded right here on the St. Martin's campus, got its license in 1922, and only last year, were those famous call letters KGY officially given up. The AM 1240 KGY Those call letters were sold to Sacred Heart Radio, and Sacred Heart Radio changed the call letters to KBUP. So officially, there's no longer a KGY. But during the 30s through the mid-80s, KGY was one of the most influential radio stations and entities in this area. And I'm writing a book about KGY, my experiences there. And at first it was only going to be about my experiences. But then I realized that, hey, I was there not quite half, or a little over half the time of its existence, but there was a lot more. And I came across an old tape. Father Sebastian, who founded KGY, gave a talk in 1952 to the Olympia Lions Club, and I found this tape by accident. And I listened to it. It was about half hour long, and he's telling about the early days of KGY, and I was afraid almost to play the tape because it was so old. I was afraid it was going to crumble and I'd lose it forever. And I still haven't transferred it to a digital format, and I hope it lasts long enough, but I took good notes. And then I ran into the grandson of Sam Crawford, who was the first news director at KGY. In 1932, he was hired, and one of the first people to do local news on radio in the Northwest, right here in Olympia, or there in Olympia. And I interviewed him at Barnes & Noble on the west side, the grandson, who gave me his memories. And then, not too long ago, I was doing a remote for Mix 96.1, and a lady came up and said, my husband used to play with Okie and the Carboys on KGY back in the 1940s. So we had coffee, and I picked up more information. One of the things I want is if you, by any chance, have some information about KGY, how it affected you, I'd like to meet with you and maybe put it in the book that I'm writing. Well, I am concentrating on just one of my experiences. Just one of my experiences, and if I can find my iPod, here it is, right here. I'm going to turn it on, and this is I know, really high tech for me to get it right. And I want to play something to sort of introduce this part of my talk. Just one of my areas in the book. Whoops, wrong one. Nope, don't want that one. Back up. All right, here we go. It'll quit. You've all heard that, right? Kind of annoying sometimes. Well, that sound is designed to assure you that the government is in control and that you'll be adequately informed in the event of an emergency. Now, if you own a radio station or a television station, there are inspectors. Why, Mike Barone knows about this. He's laughing. Mike is a radio station owner, and he knows that, well, if you own a restaurant, a food inspector is not somebody you want to see. If you own a bank inspector is not somebody you want to see. If you own a radio station, you do not want to have the FCC inspector walk into your place. No, no, no. You avoid that at all costs. But you are smart enough because you've been advised that the inspector is looking for two things when they walk in the door. There'll be other things too, but two things mainly. Number one, they'll walk to your public file. Nobody ever reads the public file except FCC inspectors. But you still have to keep it up to date. Number two, are you running those EAS tests? Do all your operators know how to do it? And they'll go up to whoever's on duty and say, run a test. Right, Mike? They want to make sure your equipment is working. It better be working or you have a big fine coming. All right, we've got that covered. Let's go back to my career. This dates all the way back to Conelrad. Larry, I'm going to tell you what Conelrad is. Here's a little something I just ran off. You really can't see it, but it says, in case of attack, tune your AM radio dial to 640, 1240 for official information. Nuclear attack, big deal. Okay. They want you to tune to 1240. KGY just happened to be 1240 on your dial, so we had all this promotion going all the time on TV. In case of an attack, remember, tune your AM dial to 640, 1240, Conelrad. 640, 1240, Conelrad. There was no 640 in this area, so it had to be 1240. Well, when I started at KGY, in 1959, I had to take a course. They selected 2 people from the radio station to take a course. I was barely out of my teens. These 2 people were required to take a course on nuclear preparedness. I found my old certificate. This is signed by Dan Evans, nonetheless. Civil defense training. I have a certificate for, let's see, what is it called? Well, the State of Washington Department of Civil Defense. So I am prepared. What did I learn? Well, I learned, for one thing, if a nuclear bomb goes off, don't stare at it, you'll go blind. Very important. Number 2, if you have the radio station, if you're the DJ on duty, here's one of the things you've got to tell people. I actually heard this pre-recorded. Obviously, I would be on duty. Number 1 is, of course, you should know your evacuation route by then, because back in the late 50s, early 60s, they wanted us to know how to get out of town, where to go, and basically head for the hills, head for Aberdeen or Olympics or someplace so you wouldn't be blown away by nuclear attack. Number 2, if that wasn't possible, head for the basement. Now, if you go to the basement, the important thing that they said that we had to tell you was to be sure you have a radio in the basement. You probably don't have a radio in the basement, so take your plug-in radio and plug in the basement. But if you don't have a plug-in downstairs and can't listen to your plug-in radio, turn the volume up real loud on the radio upstairs so you can hear it through the ceiling and listen. So who's on duty? Me. It finally dawned on me that in the event of a nuclear attack, they picked the youngest, most inexperienced guy to stay at the radio station to warn you of a nuclear attack. So I have this mental vision of people down in their basements listening to the radio up above, and suddenly there's a bright flash, which you don't look at, and there's nothing, all silence. At least I went on in glory. Truth of the matter is, nobody at the radio station knew actually what to do in the event of a nuclear attack. Even though we did remotes from bomb shelters, we had our own Geiger counter, we had all those things. Well, I guess the FCC kind of figured that out. In 1963, Conelrad was replaced by the Emergency Broadcast System, EBS. Still designed to warn you of emergencies, but it was way more complicated. While I was at, Mike is listening again, radio stations have to monitor, in this area, have to monitor, or at least while I was at KGY, I had to monitor Cairo. Do they still do that, Mike? Yeah. Cairo's a big station in Seattle. And then KGY was kind of the lead station down here, so other radio stations had to monitor KGY. I don't know if they still have to do that or not, but that was what it was for a while. Pretty complicated. Well, again, everybody had to know how to do the test. One day, February 20th, 1971, according to my diary, something unusual happened. It was more than a test. It was the real thing. And I should mention that the other way of receiving information on tests was through the Associated Press teletype. Well, it was a Saturday morning, happened to be standing near the teletype, and what looked like an ordinary test was coming through, and I watched it print out, and lo and behold, it was not a test, it was an actual real alert. This is an actual alert. I found the envelope that contained the secret word, because if your secret word, which you kept at the radio station, matched what they gave you, it was authentic. It was the real thing. So I opened the envelope, ripped it open. I think the word was hatefulness, and it matched. Good word. And so I thought, now what? A real test. Here it is, Saturday morning. I'm the only guy in the radio station. What do I do? It was in February. So I found a radio station, or a radio in the station. I twisted the dial, and everybody else was on the air playing music and doing their usual thing. And I thought, man, am I going nuts here? What am I looking at? So I called Cairo, the lead station. They ought to know. So I talked to their engineer, and he said, yeah, we got the same message. What do you think? Well, the truth of the matter is, nobody knows what to do. Just what constitutes a real emergency? The EAS test was not activated after 9/11. It was not activated after the Nisqually earthquake. I mean, you can't predict earthquakes, but you could predict that the 4th Avenue Bridge was not safe to drive over anymore. So just what constitutes an emergency? One of my favorite movies is Tom Cruise's War of the Worlds. My favorite part of this, and actually Tom Cruise is fleeing from an extraterrestrial army of killer tripods that annihilate everything in their path. Well, the best part of the movie, Mike, next time you see the movie, when Tom Cruise, you've seen this? Yeah. He's fleeing from these monsters, and there are these rays coming down, and he's in this van, and he's got his radio on, and all of a sudden, this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. Had there been an actual emergency, you would have been told where to tune. So what is a real emergency? The truth is, there's no one out there to tell you or deal with it. Radio stations, television stations, including satellite radio, we all do the tests, and we do them well because we don't want to get fined. But there's no one person out there to define what an actual emergency is. How bad does it have to be if tripods can't activate it? Well, it's very important to government officials involved. I went to a conference. I was actually involved. I went to the regular meetings up at Camp Murray there on this, but it's all about receiving the tests, not what goes into it. So I was up there at this meeting in Bellevue, and I was going to say something, saying, folks, this does not work. But there was a big conference, and the bureaucrats were in their suits and ties and dresses, and they were all dressed up, and they looked so important. And I knew that their jobs depended on this. And besides, I didn't want to bring the wrath of everybody down on KGY. Mike, you sort of like to fly under the radar when the FCC is concerned. So I didn't say anything. I wanted to say, it does not work, folks. It's also very important to the manufacturers of the equipment that make all this expensive stuff you have to put in the radio station to receive the tests. So they sell that, so it's real important to them. But how about the rest of us? Well, it's gradually starting to do stuff. The Weather Service offices, they send out weather reports, weather alerts, tsunami alerts, and things like that through that, which you might think is important, and it is, except that you've probably already heard it on the regular news. They send out amber alerts, which kind of mess up your DVR if you're recording something, and then you don't get the program you recorded, and that probably was a domestic problem in Pasco. But in all seriousness, amber alerts have saved lives. So you can't argue with that. And the best part is, the legislature just this year passed what they call a silver alert. Now, I haven't heard any of these, but looking out over, some of us, me, if we walk away from the nursing home, they will find us. That's why they call it silver alert. So just exactly what happens in the event of a real emergency. I talked to Andrew Kinney, the emergency management coordinator, and I talked to my good friend Jim Quackenbush, who I think was a member of this club for a while. He runs the 911 center. And they meet, I am absolutely convinced from my years in news reporting that we have a very, very good, efficient group of local officials who will take care of us very well in the event of an emergency. But I asked Jim Quackenbush the hypothetical question. I said, what if a tanker truck carrying hazardous material rolls over in downtown Olympia? And I was expecting him to say, well, the first thing we'd do would be to activate the EAS system. No, I don't even think that crossed his mind. He said the first priority is to get fire trucks to the scene and clear the area and make sure that the public is safe. And he said, well, we get the number on the truck, and he moved past that real fast. And I said, wait a minute, Jim, what do you mean get the number on the truck? He said, well, there is a number on every truck that carries flammable material that says exactly what that flammable material is. So when they respond, they can respond appropriately with the right thing for whatever's in the truck. I had no idea. Maybe all you knew all that, but I didn't know that. He said there was something that actually occurred in the Port of the Olympia area. Bill, you'd know about this, when some gas was released and it scared a lot of people. It turned out to be nothing, but that was back in February, I think. And they went around with bullhorns and notified everybody in the affected area personally. But not once was the EAS test ever used. Now, Andrew Kinney is very excited about the future. He says the future's almost here. Many of you have smartphones, and some of you have smartphones that will receive Amber Alerts. And if they went off right now, probably this room would be pretty noisy because a lot of you are getting those alerts. Well, they'll have more and more of these specialized things that will happen on your smartphone, so that if there is an emergency, you will be notified that way. And he also, Andrew said, don't forget ham radio. Ham radio is one of those things that's been around from the very beginning and is extremely important today. Let's say there were solar flares, or the enemy somehow destroyed all our satellites, and you couldn't get satellite reception. You couldn't, nothing would work. But one thing would work, and that's ham radio. And ham operators are very dedicated folks. I've worked with them through KGY when I was there. They are very involved in the getting the word out and communications process. One of the oldest and still very vital to our community. One thing I learned from Jim Quackenbush and Andrew Kinney, they reinforced my view that we are in very good hands when it comes to emergency preparedness. And I think probably the only thing we have to worry about is ourselves and how prepared we are. But I think the Olympian, television, radio, they're doing a great job. And I had the impression from Jim Quackenbush that they kind of look forward to those helicopters flying over, the news helicopters, because news people are doing what they do best, and that's inform you and me as to what's going on. We all know that they do a great job. Sometimes they just seem to overkill sometimes and do more than we need, but they're there. So the emergency responders can do what they do best, and that's keep us safe and make sure that the public is not harmed. So one thing, I'll just leave you a message. Radio will be around. If all other communication is gone, radio, television, phones, everything, make sure you have batteries in your radio, because terrestrial radio, Mike knows this, will always be around and probably always be your best source of information. So remember that. Make sure you have fresh batteries in your radio, and go beyond that. Make sure you have enough water in your house. Make sure you have some food for survival, and do all those survival things. And I'm talking to myself as well. So thanks, Ken, for setting this up. And it's a little different from what I gave to Tumwater Rotary, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope the tripods don't get us. If you have any questions or anything.
So Dick, don't leave me hanging. What happened in 1971?
I should have mentioned that. We didn't get blown away, but shortly after all my fretting and walking around, a new message came through and said, "Oops, we sent you the wrong recording." It was just kind of brushed off like that.
One thing people should remember, if the power and water goes off at your house, you have quite a supply of water in your water tank.
Be prepared. Know all those things. That's important. Yes?
Do you have any idea how many times the EAS system has ever been activated in Washington? And can it be done on a local level as well as a state level? Is it kind of
It's kind of hard to pin down. Thurston County Sheriff's Office, I understand, does the Amber Alerts and is kind of divided up a little bit. But the ones that you can think through, like Amber Alerts, they're emergencies, but not the same as tripods. So there's a little more thought and preparation that can go into that, and so they send them out that way. And I know they send them out regularly at the 911 center too, just to kind of make sure the channel's open. But yeah, there is no one centralized, I hate to say, all-knowing person out there who knows everything about everything. It's impossible.
Okay, thank you. Don't go away. Hey, give me a round of applause. I think, Dick, you know the routine.
I do. I sign a book.
You sign a book, and it's interesting to know that you were one of the founding individuals at the Southbound Reading Foundation. We think they do good work. Found a book that actually thought might fit pretty well, except I don't have my glasses. Yes, I do, right here. This is a book called Danger is Everywhere, a handbook for avoiding danger. It's a kid's book. Warning, beware, caution. I think there's a chapter here on nuclear disasters.
Great.
Cover your eyes and get under the desk. But if you wouldn't mind signing this, then we will donate it on your behalf to the Southbound Reading Foundation. So thank you very much. Okay, thanks again for a great program. That was interesting. Very interesting, and I